This year we're bringing on some of our old time favorite speakers from the past. I think it was just last year around this time that we had
probably something like that.
Metaphysics. And when's your birthday again? In 3 days?
In 3 days, yeah.
Yeah, his birthday's in 3 days, so we got a birthday boy here. So I would like to introduce again Karl. This time he's not talking about metaphysics. He's talking about language with the presentation title on language learning. This is a little. What is fluency and what makes it difficult to achieve? All right. ではどうぞよろしくお願いします。
ありがとうございます。じゃあ I'll begin now because the timer went on. So hi everyone. My name is Karl Bahceci. Let me introduce myself first. So I'm Karl Bahceci, as I just said. My first name is Swedish. My last name is Turkish. I was born in New York City, work in Fukuoka as a CIR or coordinator for international relations in the City Hall and Central Ward Office. I do translation, stuff like that. As for things I like food, metaphysics, psychological typology, language learning, and heavy music. So you have some representatives, Celtic frost, what I thought was good food, languages, and the Greek character for phi. So, and then that's me when I had a ponytail, so I look a little different maybe, but that was at the alcohol festival over in Hakata. So I'm gonna get going right away. And now about us, not just about me, but about us. So presumably most of everybody in this room is working with what is not their first language in some extent. Whether we're Japanese natives or if we're English natives living in Japan, I think that the topic of language learning.
I just need to readjust this.
The topic of language learning, I think, important to all of us in some way. So regardless of where we are on our language learning adventure, because it is an adventure, as I hope today will somewhat make apparent. So my experience as a learner was that I grew up in a mostly English-speaking home, but trips to my mother's home country at roughly 4 to 6 years of age helped me acquire Swedish to some extent. So I have it to some extent, the foundations. I'm not fluent in it, but I have enough where I can speak it with an accent that would make me pass for a Swedish speaker. And so that linguistic critical period led to me becoming interested in how we learn languages. Less in linguistics, more about the process of learning languages. So, warning, I hope you like Irastaya's image gallery because you're going to be seeing a lot of that today because I'm lazy. So, look at these cute pictures. So even if you don't like the content, you can look at the pictures and be happy. So, the goals of this presentation, I'm just going to go very quickly. A working definition of what languages are for the purposes of this presentation. So it's not exhaustive, it's only for this presentation. What fluency is related to languages, and some ideas about how to achieve fluency and why that might be useful for learning languages. So, I'm just going to start with some basics regarding linguistics. This is basically a digest of what learning languages, what languages themselves boil down to. But for my purposes, as I said earlier, I want to focus a lot more about how going from this basic unit, phonetics, sounds, is actually all in the service of a higher level function, which is communication between two entities. That's crucial for this presentation, so I want you to keep that in mind. So some things regarding neuroscience and language. I actually added this just because it seemed nerdy. I didn't actually know that much about it, so I added it in there. But basically, what I want to kind of go on about this is that when you look at this, these, like for example, damage to the Broca's area and Wernicke's area alters our ability to produce fluent language in different ways. And what I mean by this is that when we produce language, we're not just regurgitating facts. We're not just regurgitating things that have equivalence in our minds to a word or meaning. We're articulating something because we're trying to communicate. So there's a difference between outputs and inputs and language. That's the distinction I'm trying to create, and it's actually quite a controversial one in some philosophical schools. So, and this is stuff that Wittgenstein talks about, so some philosophy found its way in there. But anyway, basically, the brain has a complicated relationship to outputting language, and I wanted to make that clear here. So, as I mentioned earlier with the critical period stuff I was talking about earlier, children have a greater brain plasticity than adults. And this apparently has some connection with the fact that children are able to learn new languages much easier than adults seem to be able to. However, even if this is true, I don't think it's impossible for adults to become very proficient in languages, assuming they have the right mentality and approach to what a language is, which is hopefully, again, what this presentation is going to help us establish to some extent. So, what are languages then? I've been going pretty fast to this because it's 30 slides and I don't know how long it's going to take. So if I go a little too fast because I'm speaking too fast, which is what I'm doing right now because I'm nervous. I apologize. So I'll slow down a little bit because I've been speaking very fast. So what are languages? Are they systems of knowledge, organized sounds, complex codes? Thank you, by the way, to Melvin Lloyd, who made a presentation that said these things in them. I don't know who he is. I think to understand this, though, I think we need to look into why we have languages to begin with. Sorry, am I going too fast? I am going too fast. All right, perfect. Sorry. So, first of all, I want to make this claim. Languages are inherently interpersonal. In spite of how immediate they are to us, they are principally a tool or a means for conveying things I want understood by somebody else. That's why they exist. And in some weird way, they became a way of us understanding ourselves because our connection to other people is so fundamental to who we are as humans. That's going a little beyond the purview of this talk. But language, therefore, presupposes a gap between two interlocutors or people in a conversation. So there are two organisms that need to say something to someone else. And if you notice crows outside in Ohori Park when you're walking through like I do, you see that they alter, you can pay attention and see they alter the way they communicate with other crows or other birds by changing the way they speak. And this is something that's been attested to in science. The way that animals sound out is just fundamentally a way of explaining to another animal how it's feeling. And you'll even see some crows, because I have crows here, I'm just talking about them a bit, that actually try to teach human beings how to communicate in crow language effectively. To say like, this is what I want, but there's a gap, so we can't get through to each other. But as you can see, or maybe not see, there is this need for intersubjectivity as built into the foundation of what a language is. So as a consequence, I do not consider programming languages per se, because there's too much uncertainty in what a natural language, as they're called, is. So basically, a computer has a lot of equivalencies, functions. That's not what human languages, I believe, are. And that's probably a very contentious claim in some circles. But that's, for the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to be going with that. So I've gone somewhat into, I'm going to be going a little too fast now. So basically, having gone into a little bit, I want to talk about what fluency is a bit. So fluency is the ability to speak the language in a clear, unbroken, and fluid manner. So, like, as I made a little joke here, it's not sounding like a river. It's speaking in the way that is fluid. In Japanese, you have the word yucho, which is flowing and undulating. It's smooth. And so fluency, beyond just sounding nice to people listening to you speak, I imagine, it's actually fundamental. It's because that is what the language is. Its fluent state is, in a way, what the language is. Because that's why it exists in a way. I'm sorry if I'm not making sense. This is kind of abstract maybe. But effectively, I'll explain it here. So to use another analogy, this is a fluent speaker riding a bike. And this is the not so fluent speaker crashing horrendously. And the reason why, I should be actually using these notes more, shouldn't I? So, yeah, 1 second. So basically, yes. So effectively, what makes them different is that the fluent speaker, he's not thinking about what he's saying when he says those things. He doesn't have to make active associations in his brain that, okay, the is this bike is jitensha or jiaotacha or whatever he's saying. So he doesn't have to make those associations in his head as he's riding his bike. On the other hand, the fluent speaker might actually have a very well-developed vocabulary. He might actually know more words than the fluent speaker does, and yet he continues to fall while riding the bike because he hasn't developed fluency. And what I'm trying to illustrate here is that fluency, therefore, is not necessarily equivalent with how much knowledge we have about a language, which flies in the face of what a lot of traditional language instruction in school kind of devolves into. So a key consequence then of language learning and aiming for fluency is actually confidence itself. As you might have noticed, when you have just a few beers, you might speak a lot better the language that you're learning. Too many and you sound bad in any language. But basically, what I'm trying to say is that knowing a lot of words doesn't create the confidence that makes us fluent. It's confidence itself that begets the fluency that allows us to sound good in the language. So basically, fake it until you make it, or drink a lot of beer, maybe. Sorry, this presentation is like a rocket ship flying off in ways I can't control anymore. So let's continue. But at the same time, fluency might be related to our ability to confidently output words, but fluency is also a highly psychological thing. And hey, he can't be in here. This isn't his presentation. That's Carl Jung. He's trying to sneak in. If people who were here last time know, I made a presentation on Carl Jung and psychology types. So he's trying to get in here, and we don't need that in here. So a language that we are fluent in is one that we feel at home in. So as you can see, this woman is kutsuroidemasu. She's having a good time in her language house, her comfort zone. She doesn't have to think about where things are in her house. They just are there. She can go to the stove, turn it on, and make a souffle. Maybe not. But she's comfortable in that language. Feeling at home in a language is actually a psychological sensation that I think is crucial to what fluency is. And so, in that sense, fluency is a psychological phenomenon, as opposed to just being built up of tons of words I've amassed on my my journey to knowing things. Oh, wait. So, but it's also physiological, and I had a conversation about this a little while ago. Fluency involves the ability to comfortably reproduce a language's sounds. This is the other side of it. So if it's psychologically, I feel at home when I'm speaking a language, part of that is because I've used the sounds of that language enough that they become built into my muscle memory. I don't have to articulate in the sense that when I'm learning a language, I might have to. And that's actually very important because training those muscles is basically a form of exercise. That's what it is. But not about strength, but about dexterity, about being able to manipulate your mouth in the way, your tongue, mouth, throat, all of those things, in the way that allows you to accurately reproduce the sounds of that language. I think I'm going at a good pace now, I hope. I apologize if it's something weird.
We have more time for questions.
This will probably be a lot of questions after this. So to use a Japanese expression, after all of this, narao yori nareru is narero, rather, which means basically, rather than learning, getting used to, getting accustomed to something. Yeah. And that's important with languages is what I'm trying to say. Learning something is important in focused bursts of learning vocabulary. You need that. That's what goes into those are the bricks. But if you're only learning in a passive way, which is something I'm also going to get to, you're never going to get to a point where I feel like I can use it, where it's a tool to me, where I can express meaning with it. And that's a big distinction, I think, between how you're taught, because most teaching boils down to, hey, you learn this list of words, we talk about it. But really, the more important, like having a good balance between those things is what's going to make you very good at speaking a language, I think. So, I keep on doing that. So how do we usually learn languages? I've been getting into this a bit. I just want to look at these people being quizzic, funny, and questioning things. So basically, we amass information usually in school. We get information about languages, and we're corrected. But is this all there is to learning it? Obviously, as I've been saying, I don't think that's all there is to it. So what could we do? This is the interesting part, right? What could we do instead to learn more efficiently based on the view of fluency I've been trying to build in a very haphazard manner? And so basically, going back to that idea of passive learning, basically, passive refers to the retained knowledge we have about a language. We're acquiring this all the time when we're studying from books, reading things, doing some rote memorization, you name it. But active then is the application, right? The knowledge that we can use correctly. So basically, according to this scheme, all knowledge that we have active use over has to be passively understood. But is this a useful dichotomy for learning languages? Let's find out. I think that building true linguistic mastery requires not just absorbing knowledge, but challenging the brain in some way with knowledge that we're not comfortable with. So it's no longer a sense of passive versus active learning anymore, in my opinion. It's not about amassing information at all. It's not even about thinking about information per se, but rather about challenging the brain to create associations. So that's why I have a picture of deep learning, because it shows this network of things going. It looks kind of cool. But with caveats, because I already said that we're not AIs. But basically, we want to challenge our brain in a way that goes beyond just absorbing information. That's what's key here. So solution is therefore to unite what are typically called active and passive. And so here we have, I think that was Arnold Schwarzenegger in the movie originally. Yeah. Yeah. And so the gains that you're going to get are going to involve intense linguistic suffering because, as it turns out, learning in a way that goes beyond passive and active learning means putting them together in a very unholy concoction of stress, boredom, and anger at yourself. So get ready for that. A path to fluency then. So this is influenced by a person that was very important to me in learning languages, Alexander Argaze. And he's a professor that speaks over 50 languages. He's a polyglot, one of the most proficient polyglots in the world. And do people here know about what shadowing is as a language learning method? He invented it.
Sorry.
So shadowing is a language learning method where you basically repeat what a natural speaker is saying at the same time, same intonation. You basically imitate them.
Overlapping.
Yes, exactly. There are many different ways to do it, actually. Overlapping is one of them. Also simultaneous, afterwards, read and shadow. There's many different ways to do it, but effectively, as you can see here, if someone looks like Cristiano Ronaldo on the left is saying, this is boring. And some guy that has a very big chin is saying, this is so boring. He's repeating Cristiano Ronaldo. Professor Argaez also invented a system called scriptorium, which is named after the rooms that medieval monks would copy text. There was a room for writing text in. And scriptorium method of learning is similar to shadowing in that you're looking at a text and you're copying it down while saying it aloud. So if you can see these two methods as analogous to each other. But what's useful about them is that they do this. By saying something at the same time as a speaker is saying it, you're actually outputting while also learning from that information source. So in a way, it goes beyond that just memorizing information. You're actually embodying that information as you're learning it. And likewise with scriptorium, I'm writing, but from a source that I'm reading at the same time. So I'm taking something that is language I'm not necessarily familiar with 100%, but I'm reproducing it. And in the process of doing this over hours and hours, this is why it's so boring, you eventually that's what fluency comes from. You become used to using it in such a way that it's no longer something that's inaccessible to you. It just becomes it becomes your bread and butter to do this. So this is why I go back to fluency and accent. So why is getting a good accent helpful for learning languages? Because it's not arbitrary. A good accent is simply the way that it's spoken normally by native speakers, right? So what I'm hearing from native speakers all the time is presumably the accent the language is spoken in. So knowing that accent actually makes it easier to tap into this, to producing a good accent when I'm shadowing, if that makes any sense. And that actually helps us to recall the language itself when we try to use it. Because when I'm remembering not the words in a disassociated way necessarily, but how a native speaker says them, because that's what I'm mostly exposed to. I'm sorry if I'm going a little all over the place. So here we go. Rules to follow. As much as often to use, recall, and encounter the language as much as possible. Sorry, that sounds like a very weird sentence. But basically, you want to throw yourself into the pressure cooker of language learning. And pressure cooker has to do with what I said about challenging. That's the pressure. You want to constantly bombard your brain in bursts. Because if you do it all the time, you're just going to get fed up and want to drink more beer. Which is okay sometimes. Yeah, of course. But basically, you want to like think of what your learning environment is as a pressure cooker. I put myself in there, and by doing that, I absorb in a way that's much more rapid, even though at the expense of my mental health and sanity. Look at me now. So what we want to do then is get over the psychological barrier. Don't let your sense of comfort get in the way. By being only passive, we're not challenging the brain. But by doing those exercises and also just going out there and talking to people, we can get over the barrier of our native language and just begin using the target language we're trying to learn. And he keeps on coming in here, and now I can't get him out anymore. So he's going to be here for the rest of the presentation, I'm afraid. So he's not going to say anything. Don't worry about that, but he's there. But basically, I want to kind of end on this idea that languages are a bit like this picture of a diamond. Well, diamonds, not this picture of a diamond. Basically, languages are things in a way that are like the best of most human enterprise, things that are naturally grown in human culture, like food, a variety of things. sorry, I kind of drank a little bit too much, so maybe I'm being a little bit incoherent. But basically, languages are consolidated over years and years. They're basically things that are handed down to other people. So there's so much more than just words and things that are dissected in a linguist's laboratory. Does that even exist? They're basically living embodiments of a people's culture, personality, as much as food or anything else is. And so in conclusion, I timed that so well. Outside of Japanese, so I'm going to ask a question. This is just a tentative one, but if anyone else wants to ask anything else, be my guest. Outside of Japanese and English, does anybody have any experiences they'd like to share about learning languages? And I'd like to end it like that. So I put a list of different ways to say the N at the top, and I didn't want to spell the Swedish word because when you spell it, it seems kind of weird. So yeah.
Is it a slut?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I didn't want to put that there because it. But yeah, Carl Jung was here to help me out here, so I guess I'm not angry at him after all. But thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, sorry, that was a bit of a whirlwind tornado. So.
Yeah, well, floor is open for any questions, or people can talk about their experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you obviously say fluency is a major part of it, not just like the fundamental understanding things.
Yeah.
Obviously, some amount of that is needed.
Yes.
What do you think is probably the healthy ratio, or how much one relies on the other?
I think rather than a ratio in terms of like a strict quantum, I think it has to do with how much time you put into it, because I see language learning as a kind of ascetic practice almost. So I would say like 15 minutes of extreme focus is probably better than 2 hours of dispersed learning in anything. So when you're doing these grammar and like you want to basically choose a unit of maybe the grammar or vocabulary you want to learn, tackle it, but after that be done. And then maybe review it a bit, but don't focus too much on absorbing that information, because then what's important is that when you actually see it in application, that'll make you remember it far better than continuing to remember it in a rote way. So take a little bit of this fact and then see it in real life, and then that makes it yours more so. So I would say the ratio is maybe like 15 to 85 or 20 to 80. 20 being the amount you have to study like hardcore. But it might depend on the language too and how removed it is from your native language. So. Yes.
Yeah. So all I have the experience is Japanese and English.
Yeah.
So, well, I'm very much interested in what you talk about the confidence.
Yes.
If you have good confidence in yourself,
Yes.
you don't check what you're doing is good or bad.
Exactly.
But I also think, well, it's my opinion. Don't you have the sense, the part of the conditioning, doing the same thing again and again and again? Well, it gives you automatically, if you see the same situation, the same language can come out.
I agree. I think you're correct.
Yes. Confidence.
Yeah. I know, but it's because that's reinforcing.
Yeah.
But that's what language is. When you're a child, you say when you're a baby, you say things like dada or whatever, and you're like, oh look, it's your dad, ha ha. It's like so cute, right?
Yeah.
But you create those, so that's why when you're learning your first language as a baby, it's not just your mental brain neuroscience. It's not just the fact that the brain is more flexible and maybe good at learning things, but it might also be because when we're young, we're not assumed to be fluent in the language, so making mistakes is encouraged because they're speaking at all. But I think there's also maybe more complexity than that. But there might be, because for example, I think because if you look at some of the way some babies speak languages, sometimes like a child will be silent until the age like 2 years old, and then all of a sudden speaking complete sentences, and sometimes they'll be blabbling along. So it might not be as simple as
Yes.
So language is, but I think that's why I think language is such a fascinating topic because it's so built into who we are as human beings.
Thank
So,
you.
okay. So
So I guess whatever it is. So like, for example, when you want to take the JLPT, it's like this like list of 100 grammar points.
Yeah.
And you say you need to take each of these grammars and like tackle it and then move on. How do you go about like choosing which of those you want to do first? Because presumably they're not all coming up as frequently as others.
yeah, I think
So-
that
Oh,
I think a lot of that just boils down to lottery. Like if you get unlucky on a test, and any test, you're gonna get screwed. But
so there must be some stuff.
I mean, I would say I would
in terms
just
of fluency, right?
I mean in terms of, but is the JLPT really testing that kind of stuff? I've taken the JLPT, but like I don't know. I mean, in terms of fluency, I think it's important to like maybe develop like a map of all the grammar that they're planning on asking you, and then once you develop the map, kind of try to encounter it as much as possible. Have it come to you rather than studying it. You have to study it a bit, as I was saying. You need to look at the stuff you're going to learn, of course, but as much as possible, see how it's actually used and kind of build from there.
Yeah, I guess that's my question: is how do you get the knowledge of how something is used?
That's that's a very meaty question. That's a question that's like a very meaty one. That could be another presentation in of itself almost. But to put it simply, I think. Wait, can you say that one more time?
Frequency. Yeah, like for example, like you might, I'm going to learn from anime, but then you're learning.
You're learning
a fluency that's
I
not
think,
fluency for like every day.
I
you
think
can read from books, and that's a different.
So rather than one specific thing, it's just to actually do it as much as possible with anything you can. Just keep on doing it. But try to vary it. You want to put different spices in the pot, or else you're just gonna with beef and tomatoes, which can be good actually. But you want to. Yeah, I'm cooking Indian food, so I'm using a lot of spices. But you want to input as much as possible a variety of things. That way you can kind of like let's say this way. Let's say when you first start learning a language, you have a ball of clay. As you keep learning, it's being refined into the native. It's like being refined, like that Lionel Richie music video when he hello, and he's like at the end he has that really embarrassing face at the end. I think it's awesome. It's so funny though. I keep on watching that part. But anyway, so you could tell the lady was blind when she made that sculpture. But anyway, So anyway, but basically a language is kind of like you're chipping away at a ball rather than building something. You're kind of getting down to a basic essence of something. And so I think by exposing yourself to as many things as possible, you help refine that more effectively than just studying from one side. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's how
it might be an argument for corpus linguistics as well to find out the common.
Yeah. I think one second. Oh yeah. Yeah, probably.
I'm just curious, as a show of hands, who's taken the JLPT before? Yeah, that's quite a bit.
I failed.
I think a lot of us have.
I remember I took the GLPT. I don't want to go. I can do that afterwards. That'll be funny. But anyway, if anyone else has questions, by all means.
Please see, and then we'll just go.
Yeah.
And you mentioned about shadowing, which is very effective.
Yes, I think so.
Have you recognized that the Japanese sometimes can be a problem if you use shadowing?
In what sense?
In what sense?
Oh,
No,
yeah.
because keigo and this kinchoku.
Mm-hmm.
So when you are talked by somebody else, they always use keigo.
Oh,
So
I see.
you can't just shadowing that,
Mm-hmm.
right?
But that's why a lot of shadowing material in Japanese takes this into account. So the Japanese learning materials I use for shadowing, they have different sets. One that involves this one speaking in keigo to you, one that involves using kenjogo. So they all have different sets to help you learn how to use them in different scenarios.
Right. But
So,
that's good.
Yeah. So the best shadowing material in Japanese, that's a good point. It makes this clear, or it tries to give you different scenarios so you can practice in any way. But I still think shadowing at all is going to give you much more tactile understanding of the language.
Sure.
So doing it in general is going to help. But once you get into a later stage of your shadowing experience, what did I just say? Your progress as a shadower, then you're going to want to add in the more specificity. But to do anything in the beginning, I think is is better than nothing. So.
Right. So that's actually, at least that's what my problem in learning Japanese, and I felt it was, when we learn English or whatever other language, most language, like German and things. So mostly doing shadowing, we can improve ourselves. But Japanese, very often you can't just repeat what the other say.
I understand that.
Right. So that was, I think, maybe a little bit of unique part about Japanese.
No, I can understand that.
Out of curiosity, Lucy, how many languages do you speak?
Oh, it's only 4.
Only four.
Yeah.
I got a brief question. Is that how does it feel like to learn a non-alphabetical language? Because it's kind of interesting.
I would say, in my case, I only spoke alphabetical languages, but Japanese is just a matter of exposing myself and creating associations. if I didn't understand something, I would look it up in a dictionary to the point that it just became, that's a language. You just become used to it. It's what Norio-san was talking about. Like you just become accustomed because you are accustomed to being correct, so that you don't question it anymore. But that's why languages aren't programming languages, because I need to go through a period where I get used to it, rather than just understand an equivalency. Because languages are also always in flux.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Like to me, personal experience-wise, it's like when I'm trying to learn some other like continental European languages, the first thing I'm gonna do is to learn their alphabet and to learn their intonations, so that I could pronounce English words in in a weird way, say German way, French way, or Russian way.
Yeah.
And then like I add some of the synonyms, like swear words, something like that, to my actual everyday English sentences, and then like I convert it bit by bit until I can compose a whole sentence of like other like continental European languages. It's like I call it as the arsenal building. It's like the arsenal.
You would say that.
Yeah.
I know.
Not the toolbox.
Arsenal.
It's an arsenal.
Yeah, arsenal
Chemical
democracy.
reaction arsenal. Reaction mechanism arsenal. It's like
With firearms.
yeah. Come on. But it's like, to me, it's about building the arsenal first and then slightly converting the whole system into that. I'm kind of curious that is this very process for Japanese is like more steep or more long or something like that?
I just leave it up in the hands of Japanese. For some extent, like I just try to expose myself as much as possible and do things I like in it, and then that kind of naturally kind of molds my brain. So.
Last question?
It's more of an anecdote story.
Yeah.
Because you asked about that.
Yeah.
I'm South African.
Yeah.
And I went home one day, or one time one year, and I went to visit a friend in Afrikaans town. I went to a bakery and I wanted to buy bread. And I said, mag ik alsjeblieft 2 broodjes here? And she said, would you like it sliced?
Yeah. I'm just very briefly, when I speak to my mom on the phone, I sometimes use Swedish with her. So sometimes I break into Japanese by accident with her. It's like all the things in my room are bada bada. I'm saying, what are you talking about?
And how often do you bow?
I don't bow on the phone.
On the phone.
Yeah. It depends how much I drank, I guess. To go with the themes. Anyway.
All right. Well, that's good time.
All right.
So I'm ready for
There you go.